with a discounting factor that if you express sincere regret for the time that your foot slips, that's counted as part of the works. A lot of backsliding sinners suddenly come through and become martyrs once in a while. So we don't write you out if you make a lot of mistakes. But the intent, what you're committed to. For example, how can a person say they have Christian faith if they support monetary policies which mean genocide against entire nations of the third world? That's not Christianity. Oh, that's not Christianity. They cannot say they have Christian faith. Economic justice, the concern for other families, the concern for the conditions under which the new members of other families are born and raised, what kind of human beings they have a chance of becoming, what chance they have to make a contribution to humanity as a whole. And since we're very frail and we're very mortal, we as individuals can't keep the world running. We keep the world running through sovereign nations. And these sovereign nations become like personalities. The individual contributes to the nation and its work and its purpose. The nation as a kind of personality of greater durability works with other nations, similarly sovereign, to bring about a condition on this planet corresponding to a common purpose. Now, in this matter, the way in which we organize around the food for peace question will determine whether or not we succeed. Let me be very brutally frank about this, as I am on many occasions. I've been involved in a significant degree in fighting the agricultural issue in this country and abroad for about 12 years. And I tell you that in general, except for a handful of farmers in this country, among farmers they behave like a bunch of idiots. When you would tell farmers how they ought to organize, they say, no, we're going to just organize farmers, and we farmers, as farmers, will work out tactics for solving our problems. Now, where are those farmers today? Where are those farm organizations which had this great, all-so-wise policy? Then on the other hand, you go out to the other side of the tracks. You go out to the people who eat. And you say to the people that eat, well, look, if the farmers are not able to produce, what's going to happen to your diet? And they say, oh, I don't depend on farmers, I buy my food at the supermarket. And that is literally the case. I'm not exaggerating. That's not hyperbole. I've had this thrown in my face so many times by the so-called consumerists. See, the society is divided into two kinds of people, according to late President Johnson. Producers and consumerists. And we have to protect the consumerists against the producers. Matter of fact, we've succeeded. Only about less than 10% of the total population of the United States is in any way productive. Guess why we have inflation? Guess why we're poor? Someone said we had too much agriculture, too much industry, too much infrastructure. All the things which are productive. So we stopped doing productive things. We turned ourselves into an international scrap heap, a junkyard, a wasteland, an agro-industrial wasteland. And you can see it flying over this country on a clear day. Agriculture, as we used to see it flying over the same territory. Look at it today. Go to the areas. Look at what about Southworks in Chicago? Right? What happened to that? What happened to the other industries? Where's the tax revenue base of the cities? What are we doing with our suburban sprawl? We're not housing more people. We're moving people out of slums into places with 30-year mortgage and a 10-year life expectancy. When these gypsum shacks fall down, $250,000, $300,000 shacks made of junk won't last 10 years. If a heavy man leans against one of these row shacks, oh, kitten, come on, it's going to come down. Imagine if you had elephants with this thing. Gale force wind to take the whole thing out in the Atlantic. What we have to do is recognize that in order to win, we can't count people in numbers alone. You have to count the combat potential of people for what China calls people's war, in which there are often no front lines, except everything is a front line. You have to build the spiritual strength of people. Now, we're not forming a church. There are, in my opinion, too many of them already. Not too many varieties of them. But that's not my business. But we have to attend to the way our works impact upon the faith needed for the struggle. We have to fight in a manner which is consistent with that for which we fight. The farmers and the eaters must unite. They have but one cause, one common interest, no essential conflict between them. What is good for the farmer is good for the eater. Without that, their eaters will cease to be eaters, which is what this problem is. No constituency.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining. I hope that I think I've managed to succeed technically. I'm Daniel Burke with the Larouche organization, and you were just watching an excerpt from the 1988 keynote that Lyndon LaRouche gave to what was called the Food for Peace conference, which I just love that speech and love the way that he talks about it. This crucial issue of works as it relates to the spiritual strength that people have and the common interests of man, of the producer and the eater, because we're coming into a situation strategically where that conception or that sort of principle of what Nicholas of Cusa would call the coincidence of opposites, or certainly Helga Zepp-LaRouche is advancing this concept from Cusa, that when we're faced with an existential crisis, in order to solve it, you can't simply solve one part or another. You can't address the problems of one party or another, but that in fact we need to move to a higher vantage point and conceive of a future in which the development of the whole, of the one mankind, is advanced fundamentally. And only from that standpoint will we be able to move forward anyone else who's suffering from the conditions that they're placed in. Such as Donald J. Trump, whose house was just raided by the FBI today in Mar-a-Lago, who is clearly under a major continued effort of FBI intimidation. The former U.S. president, the last president who was in office before Joe Biden, is getting his house raided by the FBI. I read one of the reports where someone said it felt like a Die Hard movie. So there's you can imagine, this is the same scene that happened in 1986, October, 2 years before the speech that I just showed, when 400 federal agents showed up at presidential candidate Lyndon H. LaRouche Jr.'s house to try to encourage him that he would be, to give him the conception that he was going to be thrown in prison and that he should have no pretensions of running for president and continuing his political career. And even there was definitely a hope that was coming from these networks that they could induce Larouche or Larouche's associates to fire at federal agents and then create a kind of a shootout in which Larouche would be killed and other people as well. So thankfully that did not happen. And Mr. Larouche did not submit to this intention. And none of us can submit to this kind of intimidation, which is going on widespread way. People who are watching this probably have been following the fact that there has been uncovered a coordinated effort run through the Ukrainian Ministry for the transformation of the digital transformation, excuse me, to and also there are other Ukrainian government efforts that are involved in this. I just wrote a little report on it, which I'd have to return to get in full. But basically, there's an effort by these trolls on social media who use this NAFO tag to try to get people to shut up and to to give in to the NATO policy of World War III. And these people, it's been uncovered, were all coordinating in a Discord channel that was called the Digital Forces of Ukraine. And this had been set up basically with a Ukrainian senior project manager at the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine in order to bring this about. And this is the network that was responsible for getting our friend Jackson Hinkle removed or demonetized permanently from YouTube, for example. So that's going on. There was also, Jackson reported today that there is going to be a hit piece written in Rolling Stone against him. We had the Uhuru raids just like a week ago in St. Petersburg, Florida, I believe, which then was responded to by this conference in Chicago held by the Center for Political Innovation, in which they had those people come out and be able to make their statement to an audience of people, and that conference has been attacked by significant intelligence connected figures like Michael Weiss and others. There's 1.2 million views of their opening ceremony, which is in large part because of people who have a pro-NATO approach attacking it viciously, because they were holding up the flags of China, of Russia, of the Donetsk People's Republic, and of course Z, and the U.S. flag, right? And that really made people mad. That idea of them cooperating. So that's going on, and of course, this is in the context of the July 14th statement of the Ukrainian government about the blacklist that was announced, and the idea that everyone who was on the blacklist was going to be labeled an information terrorist, and that really they should be dealt with as war criminals. So there's a lot actually to discuss. I'm thinking about showing a short video that I made, but I think that I'm not going to because it's a little bit long. But there's a lot to discuss to go through this. You really want to read everything that we've written about the blacklist. The last statement that I just referred to, the fact that this guy, I think his name is Shapovalov, who's in charge of releasing this statement on July 14 about this blacklist. He did it at a roundtable that was supported by the U.S. State Department explicitly. And the fact that he said that those people are war criminals is crucial, right? I mean, there are banderists running around with all types of, weapons they got from who knows what all over Europe and probably in other places besides Europe, including here. And these people are saying that the individuals on that list, which include about 7 or 8 of my close friends, including Helga Zepp Larouche, Diane Sayre, Jason Ross and many others, Harley Schlanger. All of those people are in danger. Everyone on that list is in danger, as we are, as Trump it clearly is, as so many, anyone who actually stands against this World War III policy of Biden, of Pelosi, of Schumer, and of their many associates, both Republican and Democrat, and the people, and the people in the UK and in the who are like Chatham House, the people associated with the British monarchy, who are helping to craft this policy. So anyone who opposes that Anglo-American empire is putting themselves in the crosshairs. And it's up to us to turn that around, right? To try to figure out how to judo the enemy and demonstrate that there's a backlash. There's a boomerang effect from the sanctions. There's a boomerang effect from this kind of attack on free speech. And it's up to us to figure out how to make that happen in a way that's powerful. But it won't work without a conception of advancement of the one mankind. It just won't work. There's no circumstance in which, Russia wins the war in Ukraine and then that means things are going to get better. I mean, they might get better thereafter, but that's not going to be why. The geometry will change. Certain actions will become more possible. But the actions, the willful actions from the United States, from Europe, to collaborate with Russia and China, that's the key. If you don't have the world land bridge, you do not have peace in this world. It is just not going to be possible because you have to formulate a future in which all sovereign nations can collaborate for the benefit of mankind. And it's only that type of grand strategy, as Larouche would have called it, that is capable of defeating the British Empire. And that's how we got to be thinking here. We're talking about a fundamental shift happening in U.S. policy, which would be against these decades long of monetarism, of zero growth, green fascism, and in favor of the full economic development of the planet and of every person on this planet, and the hundreds of billions of souls that are to be born very in the future if we are successful. So that's my basic orientation. And so now I'm going to take you through a few news items and other things like that. And I'm going to show a little clip from something else. And then we're going to hear from Liam Murphy, who's going to give a presentation that is based on something he did. He pulled together a small group of people out in California. I believe Liam goes back and forth between California and Arizona. I'm not always totally sure where he is, but he pulled together a small group of people and put forward a really exciting presentation of Larouche's fundamental conception of Zeus versus Prometheus. That's why I used that title for the program today. And so we're going to hear from him. He's going to go through that. And then we're going to talk to my good friend Fox Green, who has been doing a ton of wonderful stuff, attacking green fascism, attacking Malthusianism. And we have learned a lot from each other. And I'm going to show you some of the work that he's been doing and then hear from him, including about the state of New York politics, of course, which is the realm in which Diane Sayre is acting, and the role of the Malthusian Democratic Socialists of America in creating a political motion towards shutting down the economy. So that's what we got on the table. Let me go ahead and show you a few additional things. First of all, I don't think I need to show you the news story about Trump. You can look into that yourself. He said that it's a move by desperate Democrats who are terrified about me running for president, which seems pretty legitimate thing to say. But But I want to show you some of the breakthrough that's been going on and then the context for that. So let me just share screen here. Yeah, I guess I'll just do this. Okay, this should work. So this is a news article in The Hindu. The Hindu is the second largest. It's the second largest. Oh, that's not really going to work. It's the second largest English language um, newspaper in India. And so it's one of the 2 or 3 newspapers of record in India. They have responded completely normally to the proposal of the Schiller Institute and Helga Zepp-LaRouche for a new Bretton Woods to end war and the economic crisis that we're in. You're starting to see that happening, that people can actually respond normally to LaRouche's ideas, both because of the advancement of the strategic crisis and also because there's a breakout of people who are, in the words of Helga Zepp-LaRouche today, for some reason, they're a little bit more aware of the fact that you should be afraid of nuclear war more than you should be afraid of someone coming after you for speaking out, which I think is quite true. That's what I think is happening. So this is a wonderful article. Here you see Helga, Lyndon, Ramtanu Maitra, who's a longtime collaborator of the LaRouches. And this is the president of India, Sri Kocheril Raman Narayanan, pardon my pronunciation, who was a supporter of the Schiller Institute and of the LaRouche movement. And the article is wonderful because it starts out, I guess I'll go back to this. It starts out with this, that LaRouche witnessed the communal carnage in 1946 in Kolkata, which of course what they're talking about is the British firing on civilians, which is what LaRouche witnessed. And this is a conversation this is based on an interview that Helga did with the Hindu. So she talks about, it opens with this thing that she's talking about, the role of LaRouche as a soldier in the China, India, Myanmar theater, developing his ideas against British imperialism because of the incredible criminality and crimes, atrocities that he witnessed. And then it goes through the specific development after LaRouche's forecast in 1971, which was that the non-aligned movement at their 1976 Colombo conference, Colombo, Sri Lanka, put together a proposal for a new international economic order that was very much coherent with and clearly influenced by the proposal for an international development bank that was made by Lyndon LaRouche and his international movement 1 year prior and circulated internationally. So it goes through the relationship that they had to Indira Gandhi. I'm not going to go through everything. You should read it. And the fact that we published a book called Derivative Assassination. I posted a picture of that on my Twitter timeline today. That went through why did this happen? Indira Gandhi was meeting with the LaRouches. She was prepared to collaborate. She was talking about these ideas of the full economic development, what that would require, full economic development of the third world, as it was known at the time, of the Indian Basin and so forth. And it goes through some more of the evidence of the work that we've done, and as well as the people that we've collaborated with, including recently, like Sam Petroda, the former advisor to Prime Ministers Gandhi and Singh, the recent Prime Ministers Rajiv Gandhi and Singh. And then it refers to the blacklist. Look at that. So it concludes with the idea from Helga as a direct quote: if we don't get the United States and Europe onto a new track toward a new system, a new Bretton Woods, the war danger only worsens. And if we could get sufficient clarity on that idea, if we could really get enough people to understand that that's how this thing works, then I think we can make a huge breakthrough. That's going to be the crucial step that we need to make. That's my view. So that's an update on what's going on here. This is getting out in the open. And I actually have one more thing that demonstrates that. Where did I put it? Oh, yeah. Here it is. There is a... you should be able to see that now. Yeah, this is Wolfgang Bittner. And Bittner is he's an author. He's actually, I think he's written some novels, but I'd have to go back and check. Anyway, he's a well-known public individual, public intellectual in Germany, and he has actually written this crucial statement that is now published in a leading website, very like a well-read website in Germany, talking about the Schwarze Liste der Ukraine. I'm not sure that I pronounced that properly, but of course the blacklist, the Ukrainian blacklist. And in it, he just makes extremely clear what is actually going on, including, you can see the references to Shapovalov and his statements about infoterrorism, infoterrorists, and so forth, and makes clear that this happened because of the collaboration with the Helga Zepp-Larouche. Now, Helga Zepp-Larouche has really not been mentioned, according to reports that I've heard from my good friends, in German media, in any German media, with anything positive, anything other than slanders, almost at all in the recent years, despite the fact that she's very well known. In China, she's always on CGTN. Anyone who's watching this probably knows that. So she's like a well-known international public figure, but they cover it up as much as possible in Germany and try to avoid commenting on her. So here's an example of someone who is not a member of the Larouche movement, but he collaborated with us in our conference that we held. I believe this is from the April 9th conference, but maybe it was the June conference. It escapes me at the moment. But he collaborated with us and found himself in the crosshairs of the Ukrainian government, as financed by the U.S. government and as with the support of the U.S. State Department. And he's decided to step up and make the truth known. So I think this is very hopeful. And I'm going to show one more thing that goes into this. Before I do that, though, I'm going to take a look and see if there are any comments from people who are watching. Oh, how interesting. Welcome, Chris Coralive. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Welcome. He says, my uncle Bob Glassborough built the infamous Burma-Thai Railway as a prisoner of war, and he introduced me to Larouche 30 years ago. His legacy lives on. Thank you. That's very interesting. Okay, be interested to know more about that. But anyway, I'm going to show you something else that sort of makes me hopeful about what we can do. Okay, so this is our friend Jackson. Everyone likes Jackson, right? So I'm going to see if I can't make this bigger. Okay, listen to what he has to say. I think I have the audio all sorted out. I don't think there will be any problem. But let me just confirm that. Oops. Yeah, that's all right. Okay, yeah, because we're in a share system audio. There we go. Okay, so listen to what he has to say.
Listen, well, I just had a long conversation before we went live, probably like a hour-long conversation. Some of you may have heard it. Do you guys know Infrared, Haas of the Infrared Stream? I'm trying to get him to stream on Rumble. I think he should. But, he's not permanently demonetized on YouTube yet, so he has the continued inclination to stream there for now, which I don't blame him for doing. But I just think Rumble's such a great platform, and it's going to be so much better than YouTube in due time. But what I'll say, I had a long conversation in Haas's Discord. I was on a Discord call. Did any of you catch it, actually? It was very interesting. It was very, very, very interesting. There's probably like 20 people there, maybe. Anyways, it was with Daniel Burke of the Schiller Institute, I believe he identifies with, and he's part of the Larouche organization. And his hypothesis behind all of this, and I think it's founded in quite a bit of honest, transparent analysis of what these world leaders and top bankers are trying to do. Agree with Larouche, what he had to say or not. What Larouche followers today, Larouchists, are pursuing is an anti-Malthusian worldview that focuses on building the world. And well, I asked him the question. I said, I said, when it comes to, say, Russia, why is it that the United States is pursuing such a reckless, and the EU at the behest of the United States is pursuing such a reckless policy of telling the EU to curb their reliance on Russian oil and Russian gas and move to green energy, which is not reliable? And he said, I think the reason behind it is because you do have a lot of Malthusian followers, Malthusian believers in these positions within the globalist elite, within the top banking professions, within the upper echelon of London and Wall Street, who do believe that there is a certain cutoff population of 1 billion people on this earth in which life is no longer habitable on this planet. And they believe that the only way of pursuing a rational global policy moving forward is not to continue to grow our economies, not to continue to grow our populations, but to actually pursue degrowth and to curtail the expansion of our populations. He just got back from Japan.
So he says a little bit more, but not much. I don't think it was all that helpful at this moment. But this is I'm glad to see there is a serious response to our organizing happening in many corners, and I want to encourage everyone who's watching to continue it, and especially, I'll close that up, especially to basically to consider what is it going to take to get the positive conception out, because there's no point in getting people riled up about Malthusian depopulation if you don't provide them a positive solution for the whole of mankind, which Jackson, of course, referred to, and I think he understands that from us. But in general, that that's what's going to happen. I mean, I've been talking to people about the Alex Jones question, and the whole problem is, I could say a lot about it actually, including important research on the networks associated with Peter Thiel, who are pushing Alex Jones right now, as in the Alex's War documentary that just came out, which was put together by a woman named Alex Lee Moyer and a production company called Play Nice that has received money from Peter Thiel. The production company has. So I think you got to look at the way that people, who are just agitating about depopulation are missing the point, right? They're not actually considering the strategic geometry as Helga's communicating it, for example, in that interview that she had with the Hindu, which is that there is an opportunity for a new and better system dependent upon that advancement of all of mankind, of the one mankind, which is expressed like more powerfully than in any other way. I think many people think this. I think it too. It's expressed in the World Land Bridge, right? It's expressed in a vision of the transformation of the world economy. And especially, as I have continually made the point, the World Land Bridge as a system of development corridors and not as a bunch of trains. That's not the point. It's about full development corridors, what we learned from our friend Neil Curtis last week about, Neil Martin, excuse me, about association, as Henry Carey would have described it. And what Carey referred to as decentralization. Basically, the lifting up of a platform, is how Larouche may have communicated it more recently, a platform of capability, of physical capability in a network of infrastructure that includes water, it includes power, it includes agro-industrial areas, nuplexes, in other words, agro-industrial complexes made around a nuclear power plant. It includes um, just the full development of our territory to the greatest possible degree of the world, in such way that people can live beautiful and meaningful lives in which they can contribute to those who come after through science, through culture, and through the love that they pass on to the next generation. So let me fill out. So now that I've shown you a couple of things I think are fun to look at, let me fill out a little bit more of the strategic picture to again make the point that we're really close to the shift. Okay, so I'm going to share one more time this screen over here. All right. So this is a little article that's on the Schiller Institute website. I definitely recommend you just read everything that gets put up there. Also, actually, before I even do that, and I have to get off the Schiller Institute page for a moment because I want to do this. I want you to become a recurring member at thelarouche.org. I talked to a wonderful person today who I've been talking to for a long time, and he decided to put in $20 a month. You can go to larouche.org and you can put in $20 a month. You can put in 50. You can put in 100. And if you put in, I think it's 50 a month, then you're going to get a bunch of our intelligence publications for free for a certain period. I should know the whole thing off the top of my head, but I don't have it right now. Because what you want to be able to do is to read Executive Intelligence Review weekly at larouchepub.com. And that's going to be a crucial part of getting this. All of these things that I'm showing have been reported in EIR. And so I'm showing you it on the Schiller Institute website, and you'll see I'm going to show it on the actual website. But the only reason I know about it is because of the intelligence team of Executive Intelligence Review. So now let me get to what I wanted to get to. So people may know that Blinken and Wendy Sherman are continuing the kind of work that Pelosi did to try to rile things up and to counter the actions of Russia and China in Africa in particular. So, for example, Blinken is giving a speech in Pretoria, I believe, South Africa, very soon. And what's he going to do? He's going to try to get up and say, you can't work with Russia and China. If you haven't watched it, you got to watch Hussein Asghari's interview with CGTN's Li Jingjing. She's wonderful. You should follow her on Twitter. And she lets him go full on. He gives a full presentation about the World Land Bridge and its history and the Larouches. But he tells this funny story, which I think I mentioned it last week, but it's just good, about how Rex Tillerson, when he was Secretary of State, he flew to an African country, landed on an airport that was built by the Chinese, and rode in a car on a highway that was built by the Chinese, to speak at a building that was built by the Chinese about how you can't work with China. So this is just ridiculous. Meanwhile, Lavrov, meeting with Wang Yi, these wonderful, wonderful guys. These are like role models for all young people across the world, tremendous people. And they've been meeting on the sidelines of the ASEAN meeting, they met back on August 5th, so it's been a little while. But look at this, the third meeting in the past 30 days. Incredible level of cohesion and collaboration between Russia and China. And what are they talking about? He made a number of comments. Lavrov did. He talked about how the U.S. is using every available opportunity to strengthen its domination across the world. Of course, talked about the visit to Taiwan from that standpoint. But then this is the more interesting point. I'm sure that our strategic partnership is a motivating force behind the movement for the priority of international law over the rules invented by the US and its satellites. How many people in the US know that there's a movement for the priority of international law over the rules-based order? Because Lavrov is not pulling your chain. There is a movement. There's a grand process of development here of a collaborative effort by nations of Africa, by the nations in Asia, by nations in Ibero-America to respond. And I mean, not merely respond, right? It's not about like simply reacting. It's about envisioning a future in which there is mutual benefit and collaboration. That would be tremendous, right? And they're not doing it because it's like something that they think would be good. They're doing it because it is existential. And I think, I forget if it was in the section that I showed, but no, it's not. At the very beginning of this Food for Peace speech that I showed at the beginning from Larouche, he says we have to think about the Lord's Prayer and the fact that across the world, people are asking for their daily bread. There is an extraordinary crisis. I keep on pointing out 64% is the inflation for July in Argentina. 64%. 45 million children in 2021 suffered from wasting. 45 million children. Wasting is the most advanced stage of malnutrition. It increases your likelihood of death 12 times over. And you really have to read Jean Ziegler's book on famine. I keep forgetting the title of it, but it's a tremendous book. Read Jean Ziegler's book. He was the head of the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, I believe, for a long time. And he'll tell you in that book what happens to a child that starves to death. First thing that happens is that they get a disease in their mouth that causes the mouth to completely rot out. You should read it. Not because I think that learning about brutal things is good and should motivate you, but because you should actually understand what's happening in the world. What does it mean? What does it mean that 2.3 billion people were in moderate to extreme food insecurity last year? You should actually try to know that, understand that, because that's part of how you'll understand the strategic situation, which is that there is a movement for the international law, for the revival of the reassertion of international law, which is what Lavrov is telling us about. So I want to show you one more statement that goes through this more, and it's really fun. African nations plan to develop their fossil fuel resources. Climate change to be damned. Okay, so take a look at what the Guardian is worried about. African nations expected to make the case for big rise in fossil fuel output. Leaders expected to say at COP27 they need access to their oil and gas reserves, despite the effect on global heating. Thank you, Fiona Harvey, environment correspondent. This is from the 1st of August. So take a look. Let's see. Soaring gas prices have made the prospect of African supplies even more attractive. All right. What happened is that the Guardian there was a document that was leaked. However it was leaked. It was prepared by the African Union, which is proposing a strategy for ensuring that at the COP27 conference, which presumably is going to, here it is. It's in November, and it's in Egypt, which is really not good for these guys. They're doing there's a very clear proposal in the document to develop fossil fuels. right? Okay, they're expected to argue that Africa must be allowed to benefit from its fossil fuel reserves. Oh my God. Revolting. And environmental campaigners from across the continent fear that the exploitation of gas and oil in Africa would bust global climate targets. Oh my goodness. Instead of being used for the benefit of ordinary people, it's going to enrich multinational corporations. Now, of course, I had to go after Nico House, who works for RT right now. At least I think he does, on Twitter, because he was he was saying the same thing, and I had to demonstrate that the environmental campaigners. I looked at one out of like 30 organizations that were part of this effort to prevent East Africa pipeline, and it was immediately on their website that they are supported by the U.S. State Department. So that's one side of the environmental campaigners. And of course, the British monarchy is a leading part of it otherwise. Africa should not be shackled to expensive fossil fuels for decades. This is totally insane. It's overwhelming and reckless given the climate impacts that threaten lives of millions of people in Africa. And yet, it says here that there are 600 million people who still live in energy poverty. Fossil fuel projects have not solved energy poverty. Well, maybe that's because they have been blocked. They have been prevented. The IEA warned last year, no new fossil fuel developments could take place if the world was to stay within 1.5 centigrade of pre-industrial levels. Oh my goodness. No new fossil fuel developments. This is genocide. And then they have the gall to claim that this is an effect of the impacts of climate crisis. Disgusting, anti-human genocide, worse than Hitler. That's what this is. I mean, you've got 600 million people. What does it mean that they say here 580 million people still lack access to electricity and modern energy? You know what access is? Access means 4 hours a day of electricity. That's what access is. So even among the people who have access to electricity in Africa, you're talking about 4 hours a day. I think it's Uganda is at 40% access to electricity. So 60% of the population don't have any access, or at least they have less than 4 hours a day. 40% of the population have at least 4 hours a day of electricity. So this is pretty funny to see the way that these guys are freaking out about it. And it's very hopeful because this is what it means to say when Lavrov says there is a movement for international law. That's what this means. It means there's a movement for development, economic development, which, by the way, is like the fundamental conception of international law as it is developed in the development of the United Nations. Or think about the Westphalian era, the Westphalian order, the era of sovereignty, of national sovereignty, comes about from the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which you can read a brilliant article by Pierre Baudry in Executive Intelligence Review about what it entailed economically. The whole concept of national sovereignty, from this standpoint, only existed from the idea of the benefit of the other. And that specifically meant physical economic development, including infrastructure, and that time especially development of canals, that would provide people a future that was a future of common benefit. So over and over again, you see this conception of the coincidence of opposites, of the unity of the future of the producers and the eaters, as Larouche was talking about it. And that's what the geopolitical masters of the City of London and Wall Street are afraid of. And that's why you have to actually go out and fight for the idea of the total economic development of Africa. Now, and look at this. This is even more coming from Chatham House. Chatham House, which is the British monarchy's, think tank, media operation, whatever you want to call it. Now, look down here. They're getting upset, right? Oh no, a difficult road for COP27. It's going to be hard to convince everyone to kill themselves. They're really worried about the fact that it's going to happen in Egypt. Do you realize that Egypt is one of the few countries which failed to submit an updated NDC, a nationally determined contribution to carbon reduction commitments under the Paris Agreement in 2021? Oh my God. I mean, this is, of course, like part of the reason that Trump was a threat to anyone. I've said many times my public view of Trump. I think he failed utterly. But one of the reasons that he was a threat, and I give him, maybe he can come back, but I'm not convinced now at all. But one of the reasons he was actually a threat was because he pulled out of the Paris Agreement, which is the whole framework of supranational control over the economies of nations and to prevent them from having the ability to develop their fossil fuels, and period, to develop. So here's Egypt basically doing the same thing, or at least amounting something that amounts to that, or it headed in that direction, maybe it would be more precise. And Egypt has never published a long-term strategy, has no decarbonization plans, despite independent estimates. It should cut rising emissions by 1/4 by 2030. Independent estimates. And 2/3 to be aligned with the Paris Agreement. It's highly insufficient what they're doing. And they're championing, moving from pledges to implementation without having quantifiable carbon reduction pledges of its own. Not pushing for more emission reductions at this critical moment risks derailing global decarbonization momentum. So they're saying right there they might lose the whole game. It might get totally derailed if African nations like Egypt decide not to go along with this lunacy. Okay, and then they talk about these ridiculous claims that they have about extreme heat waves and so forth. The latest IPCC assessment. You got to read an EIR about what the IPCC is. It's totally political. It's completely fraudulent, and they completely leave out the hypotheses that are necessary, like the role of solar activity or the role of galactic radiation, the effect of clouds. They leave out clouds, which is insane, and they do that very much intentionally. So you got to look into that. But look, Egypt is the second largest producer of natural gas in Africa. It's Egypt's going to build. They're getting. Egypt is like the number one country that I know about in terms of nuclear power collaboration with Russia. So there's so much that's going to happen here, and the British monarchy and the associated leading Malthusians are pretty worried about this, and it has everything to do with the movement that Lavrov is speaking about here in his comments with Wang Yi. So that's the context in which we should be operating, in which we should be thinking. There may be one or two things in here that I missed, but that's the basic idea. And therefore, we should be really hopeful and keep organizing like mad, knowing that that's what's going on in the world. You're not alone in the United States or in Canada or Europe or wherever you might be. You're just not alone. Forget it. There's a different potential that exists, and we have to make it happen. And in fact, a lot of what the Larouche movement is going to have to do here, with your help, is to actually reach out to people across the world and get them incorporated. I just heard today a very exciting report about certain collaboration between farmers on different continents, which people will learn more about certainly next week. So let me just take a look and see what the comments may be, and then I'm going to introduce Liam. Okay, so a few people watching. Feel free to put any questions or comments in there. Thank you for watching through my somewhat lengthy opening section. And now I'm really happy to introduce you once again to Liam Murphy. So I'm going to add you, Liam, and we'll go from there. Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you pretty good.
Okay, good.
I'm going to turn it up a little bit. Let's see if that helps. Okay, and we can see you too. How are you, Liam?
I'm doing good. How about you, Daniel?
I'm good. So, go ahead. Tell us what you're going to talk about, and then when you're ready, I can get the presentation going.
Okay, well, today I kind of wanted to lay out the fundamentals of how important energy is, and I really wanted to question people's knowledge on energy as well as their view on economics. I think that that's the fundamental thing that separates Larouche's ideas from many of the ideas out there is the basis of energy and energy flux density and the triple curve function, those types of things into our economic outlook. And I wanted to really lay that out in a certain kind of context.
That's excellent. I think I agree. I mean, if people could grasp the concepts that you just referred to and incorporate it into the way that they look at the world, we're gonna very quickly take over. So
Okay, well, great. That's exactly what my presentation will be on. So
excellent. All right, here we go. Let's see. We can do it like that. We can do it like this. Let's do it like this. Or we can do it
I
like
like,
this.
yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, so my presentation, energy. I'm titling it Humanity's Gift to Destroy Oligarchy. Next slide, please. So I wanted the audience to think for a moment, what are some of the ways we use energy? And because we don't have any audience to ask the questions of right away, Daniel, can you think of some ways that we might use
Well, we
energy?
can ask people. Okay, yeah, but all right. Yeah, people who are in the chat, you should respond to this. There is like a 20-second delay or something like that. But yeah, it's going to take a little. It's going to be too long to do that. All right. So how do we use energy? Well, we use energy to cook food. We use energy to provide light in our houses, electricity in our houses. I am hearing a train going past my house. We use electricity or energy for transportation, and of course we have to build all those things. We have to produce all of those things in factories and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. I think you encapsulated it very, very well. You know, there's a lot of things I think today, especially in the West. You did a presentation earlier about in Africa how they only have 4 hours of electricity,
Yeah.
and that's what's considered availability there. And that is just crazy because when we take a lot of these things for granted over here in the West, and so I really wanted to ask this question to get people to think about. So what are some of the ways we use energy? And the answer is literally everything we do uses energy. And I mean, us ourselves, we are energy beings. We take calories. Calories is a measurement of energy. When we work out, when we just walk, even when we're sitting and we're thinking uses energy and uses calories. And so everything that is around us is all energy. And a lot of things that we take for granted, like water salination plants, people don't realize that all the water that we flush, all the water that comes through our faucet that we just depend on every day, it all comes from energy. And it takes a tremendous amount of energy to run these types of water plants, to run all the light bulbs in our house, like you said, everything. So
You're making me think also of the of the thing that Larouche said in that little speech clip at the beginning. He said that you run into people who say that food comes from the grocery store.
yeah, they don't get it from farmers, they get it from the grocery store. And that's
Yeah.
another thing that people don't realize about energy as well, is how much energy it takes to grow modern food. These days, these fertilizers, it takes a lot of energy to produce these fertilizers that you need to feed billions and billions of people with small amounts of spaces. And then the thing is, the more food that you'll grow in a smaller space, you need more energy to do that, to raise the productivity of food. So energy is incredibly important to every single aspect of our lives. So I think we can move on to the next slide if you could. So this is actually Photoshop. This is from a
That looks
climate
like
protest.
MS Paint to me, but yeah.
Yeah, it was I forget, it was like say no to plastics or something like that before.
Yeah.
But you know, a lot of the protests that we see about when these people argue for like lowering our consumption and our energy expenditure and things like that, what they're really saying is like what they're eventually going to come after is things like hot showers. Like I see that happening within a year, is there's going to be a hot shower discourse, you know, like, oh. And I was reading something from the World Economic Forum where they were saying we need to follow Japan after the Fukuyama crisis right now to curb our energy. And within the article they were saying uh, government mandated shower limits and limits on how hot showers can be and stuff like that, as if we were already living after a disaster, like the Fukushima environmental, natural disaster crisis. So that's why I wanted to include this kind of funny image.
You're absolutely right. I was looking there for just a quick second, excuse me, for the latest report, which I haven't actually read it in full. But I mean, think about what's the most energy dense institution, part of our infrastructure. What do you think? One of the absolutely most energy dense, for example, buildings there is in the country. And the answer is hospitals. And there has been a huge effort, been regularly published in the British medical magazine, The Lancet, to try to tell people that like MRIs and CAT scans and so forth, these take way too much energy. And so we really need to scale these things down because otherwise it's going to contribute to climate change.
An important thing to realize there too is when they say scale it down, what that really means is making those procedures more expensive, so only the hyper wealthy have access to them anymore.
You're absolutely right, which demonstrates the whole coherence entirely with, with austerity and otherwise it's exactly the same thing. But please go on. I like this. Say no to showers. I mean, they're basically saying that kind of thing already in Germany. I mean, look, how many nations in Europe have already agreed to allow their people to go scavenging for firewood because of the energy crisis.
And
Really
Daniel,
insane.
that'll be relevant to what I'm going to talk about later in this presentation, is the fact that wood is the first stage of our energy development, and they're trying to revert us back to the first stage.
Absolutely.
That is what the degrowth agenda is.
Shall I continue?
Yes, please. So, what is economy? I wanted to ask the audience this because, there's a lot of definitions out there, and what we're taught, I just recently graduated college, and obviously I recently graduated high school as well. And the ideas that we're taught in college and in high school, especially about what economy is, are we don't realize how politically charged they are and how they are not in any way necessarily scientific definitions. And they try to convince us that they're giving us these scientific. Most of us would probably answer that economy is the management of scarce resources and a limited amount of resources, and managing it so that you could perform best under those conditions. So we see there a lot like how Larouche noticed that there are certain, not suggestions, but there are already certain things that were taken for granted in like Euclidean.
Certain underlying axioms and assumptions.
There's underlying axioms and assumptions today in the definitions of economy that we're taught. And so that is really the main thing that I think that today's presentation I want to challenge, is that idea that economy is abysmal science, and that economy is the management of scarce resources. We need to get out of a scarce mindset and realize that the human mind and discoveries make their limitless possibilities.
Absolutely.
Next slide, please. So if you haven't read any Larouche book yet, I have got to tell you that you need to go read There Are No Limits to Growth, because I think that this is the fundamental issue that we are facing today, is this kind of idea that there are limits to growth. And, the Club of Rome came out with a report in the 1970s, and they left completely out of the picture of their models any technological development or growth or impact of human discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Human discovery is what makes mankind, the capability of making creative discoveries and learning about the fundamental backdrop of what makes up the universe, and understanding the universe has pushed us forward to where we are today. And so we need to change our view of economics from abysmal science and from science of scarce resources to having an ever adventurous mindset of what is it that I can contribute to humanity and can bring and make a fundamental discovery that could push humanity forward, so that we could have a better society and a better galaxy, even, because we need to think of galactic terms now in the 21st century. How can we push forward with that? And we're not going to do that with today's assumptions about economics. So next slide, please.
Ooh.
So today, like I said, there are many ways that we are progressing to where the scarce mindset is a complete fallacy. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of the Philosopher's Stone, but it's an idea that the alchemists had of developing a way of transmitting different elements into another element, like lead into gold. And a lot of us may have heard of this growing up and thought of it as something mythological, and it is mythological to some extent, the idea and things surrounding it. But the thing is, now today, again, with humans' creative discoveries and the pushes with science that we're making, this is becoming something that is fundamentally possible to do. And it has actually already been proven possible. It's just not yet affordable. You can transmute one element to another using the power of nuclear transmutation. And so we're talking about, within 20, 30 years, completely eliminating the concept of scarcity at all, because we could possibly form new materials and new beings from practically what seems like nothing. And so this creates a fundamental concept and a fundamental contradiction to the idea of scarcity. So thank you. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
All of history has been a competition between oligarchy and human creativity and discovery. Again and again, there has been people like Malthus who say, oh, humanity can't progress because there are certain limitations, or, at all these different stages of developments, people said that we were going to run out of coal 200 years ago. So think of it from this perspective. Think about the Greeks and the Greek mythology. You could see this purely through Greek mythology, as in you could see Zeus and the gods. Where do they sit? They sit on this big high mountain above the humans, and they meddle, and they're humanoids, and they have lust and greed and all of these horrible emotions. And really, they're not that far different from humans, except for their level of privilege and the fact that they sit on high above all of them. And there's a very interesting story, the story of Prometheus, in which the gods, they didn't want humanity to have access to fire, the tool that would take them further, because they thought that it would make the humans unruly. And they hated humanity and didn't want humanity to progress and wanted humanity to remain under them. Now, who does that sound a lot like today?
Sounds like a
Anyway,
rules-based order if I ever heard one.
yes, the Zeus-based rules order.
Yeah.
You gotta follow Mount Olympus's rules.
Mm-hmm.
The
Otherwise, you
rules
get
are
hit by a
based and
thunderbolt.
you must obey.
I just want to really encourage people to go and read the Aeschylus play Prometheus Bound, and then also the incredible play by Percy Bysshe Shelley, Prometheus Unbound, which is just amazing. They're both wonderful. They're both absolutely amazing, but you got to read them both. And um, to see that this is, think of what Larouche would say is that, look, if in a long ago period, when you had the first rise of the of Troy, for example, or in the ancient period of long ancient period of Egypt, what you had as a commonality was that certain civilizations that had been able to advance in on the coastlines, for example, in the Mediterranean, for example, had the ability, because you could travel so much more easily on water than you could over land at that time. There weren't any highways there, and it was incredibly expensive to travel over land and extremely difficult. But you could build a boat and you could go see the guys, far away from you, and then come back with their ideas and come back with new technology and come back having, traded for goods that you required. So then you had certain civilizations that were more advanced and developed, not merely because of their material circumstances, but also because of the choices that the people made and the ideas that the people had. But then those civilizations would come into contact with an inland civilization that was much less developed, and they had a choice whether they could be Zeus or Prometheus. They could come in and say, "We're going to kill all the men and enslave all the women," or whatever. We're enslave the people and kill them and loot them completely. Or they could come in and say, "We're going to treat you also like human beings, and we're going to teach you and give you the benefits of everything that we've gained." So this is a really serious thing that happened in the ancient world, and now it continues. Now that's the whole issue of fossil fuel development in Africa. So, pardon me, but that was I think it's a really wonderful place for people to begin.
Great points. And to take the story further, for people who may not be totally aware of Prometheus, but Prometheus defied the gods because the gods didn't want to give humanity fire, but Prometheus gave them fire and the ability and the skills to use it. And from that, Zeus actually sent, I believe it was like a raven, to chain him to a rock and then pick at his liver every single day and have it rejuvenate. So just eternally torture him for what he did to progress humanity. And I think that that's also very reflective of the just the hatred that they have for humanity's development, that they look at all the scientists or the people that have made amazing contributions to humanity that they often raise up arms against. It's like they're picking at their liver. But that with that
there
gift,
it is. Ooh.
yeah, with that gift of fire, humanity was unleashed, and from that point on, we could fight the oligarchy because we could grow and develop our species and use our creative powers to push us into new modes of production and new modes of being, to where we could progress as a species beyond their rule. And so humanity's progression is been through stages of its control over. As our control over fire has progressed, we've progressed forward and been able to greatly exceed prior expectations. So next slide.
Oh.
So here, I don't know if we could watch the video, but I just did a picture of it. This is Obama, and this is his famous clip of him where he states, if if Africans had nice cars, if they had AC, if they weren't totally poor, the whole world would boil over. So it's exactly like what Zeus and the oligarchs, were basically like their attitude of, if humanity progresses, oh, things are gonna fail and things are gonna go down. We can't have that.
I would also add that he says in it basically that unless we find a new form of energy that's going to develop these things. And at another point in time, Obama said, we don't need no newfangled fusion. So that really underlines the point. Like, Obama is well briefed on the fact that we could have great breakthroughs in technology and in science that would provide for the populations across the world. Um, and even if he accepts that, whatever. I mean, that's what he knows it's possible, and he's still against it.
Disgusting.
Absolutely. Okay, next slide. Here we go.
So I think that the first thing that we should talk about when referencing this idea of humanity's progression through its development of fire, we should first look back to humanity's very first form. And this is actually what Larouche talks about in There's No Limits to Growth.
Mm-hmm.
And he makes the point that in a hunter-gatherer society, as pictured here, you would need about 10 to 15 kilometers of land per person in order to sustain their life. So that calculates to just around 10 million humans total. But clearly we've gone way further than that. Now we have, I think, what is it, like 7.6 billion people? So why is it that we're here? What is it that was able to push us forward and develop us? It was our creative discoveries and our manipulation of energy or fire that pushed us forward and allowed us to expand and create more energy in a smaller amount of land.
Absolutely.
So you could kind of frame this in the different developments of our primary energy source and what we used as our energy source, and you could see how we developed. So when we first had wood, we could generate around 2,000 megawatts per person in the early United States using wood. But there's problems with wood. You got it's kind of bulky. You have to chop it down. You need to deforest large areas, and then there's a large regrowth cycle to replant the trees.
Mm-hmm.
And it's heavy to transport and hard to use. And like you're not gonna power like a big old. Like just some
you
heavy
can't have like a
industry
car. Yeah, you can't run a car on firewood.
Yes, it's just not going to work. So humanity was, this was a big boost for humanity to have access to firewood and to use wood as an energy source. I mean, we were able to cook. We were able to, basically provide fire and warmth, make tools. So this pushed humanity forward from that hunter-gatherer just without any skills to a period where we could have agriculture, have animal husbandry, and start to build a larger population. And
Mm-hmm.
You even see back at this stage where they had wood, some people are saying, oh, well, we can't have any more humans. There's not, we're running low on wood, and there's too much, humans are using up too many resources, and it's just not going to work. But then we made a creative discovery, and we pushed forward. So next slide, please. Coal. So after we get wood, we move to coal, and then coal is a huge upgrade because it's twice as energy dense as wood. And with not only is it the energy, but with coal comes all these new technologies and all these new benefits that we can have as a society and make discoveries from using coal. For instance, steam engines. From steam engines and using coal in the Industrial Revolution, that completely changed transportation, work, urbanization, everything forever. And to this day, we still use coal. And in China, they're building more and more coal plants to this day. And so this was a major, major, major improvement to wood. So from wood to now the use of coal, the population can majorly, majorly expand. And so I'd like to show that also in the next slide. There's a graph, I believe, that
Absolutely.
is illustrating that. So bam, look, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when we start, applying new creative knowledge and new ideas that humans are developing, and we're unlocking our technological progress, suddenly we see that there is way more availability of energy, which means that we could have way more humans. You could grow or develop or produce more energy for the land that you had, which means that you could have more humans. And as
Absolutely.
we've continued to progress, you see this go on and on. So the idea right now that we have overpopulation, as you can see, they were saying back then with wood that, the population was done. But it's more than quadrupled since then. I think it's way more than quadrupled now, no? I don't know.
Absolutely.
So
No,
next,
excellent.
would like to make a comment.
And by the way, Freeman's article in the IR, which is titled something like 25,000 new clean coal power plants will industrialize the world, or I forget exactly what the phrase is at the end, but it's very good on clean coal. Okay, please continue.
So believe it or not, actually, even with coal, they were starting to make predictions that they would run out of coal.
Yep.
And they were saying that, we're going to run out of these coal deposits.
Mm-hmm.
And also at the time, they were having some issues with things like sulfuric acid rain, although now there's all sorts of ways of cleaning it, and things of that nature. There was a real panic, and it led to some Malthusian type ideas again of, we're not going to have enough people. But what those oligarchical types were missing once again was a realization that humanity is always going to find a way when it thinks creatively and it applies itself to making discoveries. And that's exactly what happened. We started using petroleum products and natural gas, which was far more energy dense. It was much easier to transport. It was highly available. And you could see right around these times when we're starting to develop petroleum and our exploitation of that, oh man, the life expectancy just majorly shoots up. And a lot of people don't realize too that it's not just energy. Again, when we saw wood, there was changes in culture, there was changes in society and the way it was organized. Every time you change your energy source and your primary energy sources, your culture changes, and your organization of culture changes. And in a way, I mean, your energy source is culture. And so all these technological changes and developments are being made whenever you develop your energy. So for instance, with petroleum, almost everything, I can look around my room right now, and most of the things in here have plastics or some other petroleum byproduct or product that is ultimately made from petroleum. So we need to realize that at every single stage, we're seeing dramatic, not just energy production gains, but real gains in the types of lifestyles that are even capable of existing.
Absolutely. Ooh.
So what do we have as the future? Because as we all know, there's been a huge attack on fossil fuels. We could debate about how much or so that is deserved, but there's no denying that fossil fuels have pushed humanity forward in a revolutionary way. But the time is now to move forward to even higher forms of development. And we could be sustainable, so-called sustainable. We could use that word. But what they don't want to talk about is that atomic energy is not a backwards thing like the solar and the wind, but it is actually an entire order of magnitude higher than we even have now of what is capable. With atomic energy, we're talking about mass abundance of energy. We're talking about a complete lack of energy scarcity. And there are even new technologies such as small modular nuclear reactors, which can be used on like off locations. They don't even have to be hooked up necessarily to a grid. And you could use these to provide a mass amount of power to, like, let's say like a rural hospital or a rural manufacturer or a rural, I mean, a military base. Although I don't know how much I like military base. I don't like. But anyway, these modular nuclear reactors could be used for all sorts of crazy things, and there are endless possibilities that we have, and the amount of waste. And even if we're not necessarily worried about like, we're not climate catastrophes, the amount of waste that we have to, the amount of money we have to spend on the waste of nuclear energy is way lower than like any other energy source. It's very inexpensive when we actually use it in a sustainable way. Like, most people don't think that it's waste, but you could actually reuse the rods multiple times, and the, like, I think it's like something like 90 some percent of it is completely renewable. And so, I mean, atomic energy is the absolute future that we have, and with it is not just going to come unheard of levels of energy density that can take us to the stars. It also includes a new whole culture, a new whole possibility of how we can organize society and how we could organize our politics, our economy, our social structures. It's all a new chance for development, and it'll be the first time ever where I think that we could really have a united humanity, and a humanity that has the capability of doing things together that really demonstrate the idea that humanity is in control of the destiny not only of itself but of the entire galaxy.
Amen. Nuclear. I mean, okay. I'm gonna let you. I'm gonna let you move on. I'm gonna get. I'll save my comments for afterwards. Ooh.
Well, I mean, I think that this is the modern Prometheus vision, and this is the Larouche vision. Is we can work together as humanity with these new discoveries that we've made and can apply, and the progress that has occurred over history, and all of the
Mm-hmm.
sacrifices and struggles that have happened in our country and around the world. Now is the time when all of that responsibility lies on our shoulders. And are we going to equip humanity with modern fire, or are we going to keep them as slaves like the oligarchs do?
Yeah.
And this is why I go by Space Larouche on Twitter, is because I believe in the vision of a multi-planetary humanity, of a humanity that seizes not just the whole Earth as our own, but the whole universe as our own. Humanity is truly a unique and beautiful species, and we all have creative power, as I think was demonstrated in this presentation. So, thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. That was really fun, and I absolutely agree with that. Let's see if there are any questions or comments. Neil Martin says, job well done, Nate."
Thank you,
And
Nate.
yep, and we got a few other supportive comments. But please get something in here if you want to ask anything. I want to make a quick point to illustrate your approach here. Look at the case of fusion rockets, fusion-powered rockets. We have fission-powered space vehicles, but we don't have exactly nuclear rockets, either in fission or in fusion. But with presently, I think that a trip to Mars with chemical rockets takes something like 9 months. I think it's about 9 months. I could be off by a little bit, but it's around there. Whereas a trip in a nuclear fission powered rocket would take perhaps 3 months. So we could cut
Yep.
it to a third. And then get this, a trip on a fusion powered rocket would take a matter of days or weeks. I mean, it would be an incredible development. And I have to tell you, like, this is happening. I had dinner with a guy who has a startup in Brooklyn, trying to develop a fusion propulsion. And we have an interview on our that was done by 21st Century Science and Technology, I believe, by my wonderful friend Megan Degrowth, the president of the Schiller Institute in the United States. And she talks to a guy at Princeton. He's sort of in Princeton, New Jersey, associated with the university, but with his own organization, working on fusion propulsion, and says it's going to be possible much sooner than people think, in a matter of less than 10 years. So imagine if we actually had a crash program where people, with governments of the world, committed themselves to that kind of development. We're going to be much further along than people would imagine. I mean, my kids are going to be, teenagers when Russia and China build their shared lunar base, 2035. So, and who knows, maybe by then we get the United States to join it. If we don't, we're kind of screwed. I think that we need to do that. So it's much closer than people think. Okay. Let me see if there are any other comments. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, one thing that was interesting about what you said, and it's just, you really can tell that they have an oligarchical view once you just, all you really have to do is just study the advancements being made in nuclear, and then look at the facts at how they budget research into solar and wind versus how they budget research into nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the exact numbers, but I believe that it's like and I haven't looked at the climate deal thing that they're trying to pass now, but I think that I think it's like 40 or 50% of like our energy research money goes to like solar and wind or something like that, and only like a single digit amount goes to nuclear. But what is the future technology that it actually has lasting promises and could literally revolutionize society? Now, with these renewables, if they could somehow make them actually produce enough electricity to sustain the population, I guess they could reduce emissions or whatever, but they're not going to create a completely new societal foundation for us to extend ourselves beyond the planet and also have energy abundance for the entire world. So that was just a comment that I thought was interesting. And could I also share? I interviewed someone who's really big into the EV industry today, and I had some I wanted to share, if that's possible.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
So yeah, there's this one guy who I met in Sedona, Arizona, who he's huge in the EV industry. He's been test piloting. He's test piloted over like 10,000 different electric and hydrogen and even gas vehicles over the years. He's a big exec from like Pasadena, very rich guy. But he was telling me about the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, which not many people are aware of, especially in comparison. Like when people think of electric, even including me, a lot of the time, I just think of it as all one. But they also have these hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And I did a little bit of research, and those hydrogen fuel cell vehicles could actually, you could create that hydrogen through nuclear.
Hmm.
And so if we did want to make progress into, getting, depending on nuclear for pretty much everything, and even transmitting cars away from fossil fuels eventually to nuclear, that could be a possible avenue we could go down, because with the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, you could actually charge your vehicle fully within like 5 minutes, while the electric ones take like anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour or something like that, I think. So I thought that that was something worth investigating, and I would really think that we should develop, push out like ideas of like what our future under a fusion economy could look like, and that is something that I'm doing right now, trying to do with a book that I'm writing right now, that I'm gonna call "Now Is the Hour for Nuclear Power." So, that is what I would like people to imagine. Try and imagine what a fusion-based economy and a fusion-based future would look like, and I hope that we could try and do that within the Schiller Institute and the Larouche organization, is continue to put out materials that will inspire people to push for a fusion-based future and economy, and help put out materials to help people imagine what that's for. I think nuclear has had a very bad marketing team. When people think of nuclear, they think of The Simpsons. You
Yeah,
know,
well, but let me intervene a little bit, because there's been a scheme to shut down nuclear, and so
yeah,
all of the anti-nuclear movement has been completely. I mean, look at like our friend Jeff Young. Jeff Young was an anti-nuclear advocate for about 45 years, and he's a
yeah.
wonderful guy. So he got sucked into a really bad idea because there was a huge effort to try to poison people against growth and development and progress, and that begins around the late 1960s. And I mean, it gets huge traction at that point, and that's how this thing develops. And I also want to underline one further point here. No one is going to develop Africa with renewable energy. It's a total fraud, and therefore you have to understand it is genocide. When people come out and they say, "Oh yeah, we're going to be fine. We're just going to reduce things, and Africa's going to be fine with blah blah blah," it's genocide. It's nonsense.
I mean,
So
not to mention just Africa, but I when I gave a version of this presentation in the Antelope Valley in California, a lot of Californians live in kind of a bubble, and we got into a little argument because we were talking about the Midwest, and this one girl was trying to propose that we could power the Midwest through solar power. Now, I don't know. I mean, obviously, this is a California we're talking about here, so they live in La La Fairyland and have never been to the Midwest. But if you know anything about the Midwest, you know that you're not going to power the Midwest through solar power. And the idea that you could power and sustain a quality of life for people in the Midwest using only solar and wind is it's gonna result in the poorest people, not even the poorest people really. I mean, eventually with the plan that they have to continue the push of degrowth, it's gonna be even the middle class is gonna be living in just absolute squalor if they continue to push us backward in our energy growth.
well, I thank you for that, because that's a great segue into the conversation with our friend Fox Green, because he has been carefully studying the the people who have been pushing that in New York State.
Great.
So thank you for an excellent presentation. People really appreciated it, and yeah, a lot of good stuff there. So and we'll talk again soon, Liam, and I'll see you soon.
Okay. Great. Cool.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye. Okay, Fox, I'm going to bring you on.
All right.
Hi.
Hey. How's it going? Can you hear me okay?
Good. I can hear you great. Yeah.
There we go.
Welcome to the World Land Bridge Show, Fox
Thank
Screen
you. Thank you.
of Space Commune.
It's space theme tonight, right?
Yeah, that's right. Space
Space
LaRouche, Space
LaRouche and Space
Commune.
Commune.
Well, I really thank you for coming on the show, and for people who are watching. Fox and I, we know each other for a little while. I really much enjoyed appearing on his podcast, on the podcast that he and Alex do with Space Commune. And there's a lot to discuss tonight. So I'd like to show people your article, Fox. Would that be okay? If I
Yeah,
can
sure.
go into that? Okay. So let me just do it like this. I think we'll do this. Okay. So this is on your website, spacecommune.com.
Yep.
And you wrote this. This is, like about a month ago. No, not a month ago, only a few weeks ago now. But deindustrialization and the fake economy. This was in the midst of the barista conversations, which were pretty fun.
Yeah.
So talk to. I mean, you have a lot of really interesting things to say here, including you talk through some of what your experiences have been with Peter Buffett, and also your conclusion is very well. Maybe we could start by talking about this section of the article about the servant economy. So, would you like to share with us what you think? What is this servant economy?
Sure. Well, this discourse kind of bubbled up, and it made me really think about it. So much of like my politics and what I think about comes from just right in front of me, my backyard. I'm a person who gets engaged in my community, and so these are things that I've witnessed up close. Is that like the Hudson Valley, upstate New York, has turned into like a boutique community. It's it's kind of been this way for a long time, but it's trending more and more all the time, to just be sort of like a vacation land for rich people who just want to like go out to eat, go to the farmer's market.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, it was fun, it was nice, but then the rents went up, the real estate prices went up, and just regular people were getting priced out all the time. And talking about the servant economy makes so much sense, because a lot of my sort of real world activism kind of stuff was centered around housing and the housing crisis, and how it's become unaffordable. But a big piece of the equation is that there's no good jobs. People can't afford to live here because there's no good jobs. They all they can do is work in a restaurant, or work at a hotel, or be an artist or a musician. And or work at Starbucks, and there's like no real industrial economy.
Yeah.
So that's all it is. We're all just servants. We're not creating anything. And what that really is a degrowth economy, an economy where your output, your productive output, is just constantly decreasing. I just learned about this topic, degrowth, a few years ago, not that long ago. It was totally foreign to me. I think most people don't know what it is, but it's becoming more and more mainstream. But
I mean,
yeah.
Well, just to say that in a certain sense, I think it's very interesting, because your experience of, which you write about in the article, of watching Peter Buffett come in and try to mold the area into a degrowth utopia. That's happening on a small scale there, but it's happening in the large scale across the country. And then you see that my hope is that increasingly people are recognizing that fact in the same way that it was unavoidable for you guys to recognize it.
Yeah. Well, you just look around. I was going to say, I've just learned what degrowth was a few years ago, and now that idea, that concept is really set. I've sat with it for a long time. I look up, I look around, and I'm like, oh my God, we've been living in degrowth for a long time now. It's insane, and most people don't realize this. But then the more you dig, the more you learn, the more you realize that, like, wait a minute, something shifted in our economy basically after World War II, where all of a sudden, like, it was like this slowing down of
Hmm.
our real material economy, and that coincided with the creation of the New Left movement,
Hmm.
which pushes this sort of westernized Marxism, fake Marxism, and now you get all these people who are socialists, like the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, pushing for renewables and bike lanes and things like that, and listening to the last presentation, we learn that, like, okay, so energy has to actually evolve. We have to evolve with energy in order to become more productive, more efficient, and bring life to humanity. And what they're proposing is to basically roll us back energy wise, bring us back to, like, less energy dense forms of infrastructure, like bike lanes and
Yeah.
windmills and solar panels that just they can't replace fossil fuels.
And it has to do with this general American problem of not caring about other people in other parts of the world. Because if anyone looks at what's going on in Haiti,
Mm.
um, the watts per capita that's used in Haiti is like below the chart. It's just like dropped off the chart. And our team was putting together a proposal for the economic development of Haiti, and was trying to figure out how could it be so outrageously low. And the reason is that a large amount of the energy that is actually used in Haiti is not really accounted for because it's firewood.
Hmm.
And if you look at, of course, Haiti is one half of the island Hispaniola, with the Dominican Republic being on the other side. And if you look at the Haitian half, um, it's been denuded. The landscape has been denuded of trees. It's
Hmm.
just been, which of course creates all types of other problems. Like the trees make things cooler. They create a completely improved environment for people to live in. But it's being destroyed, and people don't comprehend that that's what we're talking about. Which actually, I'll show a little bit later, maybe in a conversation, a clip from the documentary that you made called
Cool.
Consumerism, which uh, really shows that people are arguing for this. They're arguing for
Oh yeah.
that people should have the same standard of living as they do in Haiti all around the world.
Yeah. I mean, the more I was incentivized to learn about Peter Buffett, because he's literally sort of taking over our city where I live. But the more I learn about him, the more I, like, study who he is, and he always wants to, like, have conversations with me, or he says he does, but I'm like, I already know who you are. I know what you're about. He's always promoting articles that talk about, like, reducing the population. Um, he wants to roll back progress and live, like the primitive, societies, because we all have Wetiko, this virus where we
Oh
just want
yeah,
growth. Uh, and it's like scary. It really is like actual hardcore Malthusianism.
yeah.
And people on Twitter make fun. They're like, oh, saying Malthusianism, this, that, and the other. But it's like that. No, that's really what these people think. And you could argue all day where that inclination comes from. And I think that's probably a lot of what the work that, like, Larouche did was,
Hmm.
like, studying where that motivation came from,
Hmm.
and
But it's a fact that that's definitely how they feel.
Yeah, it really is. It's not like, oh, I'm just like calling them Nazis and just being
Right,
hyperbolic. Like that's
right.
literally what they really want to reduce the population.
Yeah, I think there's this. I mean, people are dealing with a problem, right? Which is that like all of us were environment. Anyone who's like a millennial and younger was an environmentalist when they were kids
Yeah,
because that's what we were trained in. I was
yeah,
a first grade teacher, and I watched them go to kindergarten and first grade classes and teach them lessons about changing your light bulb. They were totally based on on communicating the idea that economic growth is fundamentally bad for the environment. And I told this story to a lot of people before, but I was a fifth grade teacher. I was a middle school teacher. I was a science teacher, which was silly because I never studied science in school. But I they I was it was at a little private school in Manhattan in Harlem, and I received a thick binder full of lesson plans from the previous teacher, and a large number of them were from the World Wildlife Fund.
yeah,
And the whole time I had been reading Larouche, and I had been saying, "Well, this is over the top." You know, he's they're really overdoing it. This is like too much. That they're making a case that's too much. But then I got handed a lesson plan from the World Wildlife Fund, which of course was organized by Prince Philip and Prince Bernhard, and Prince Bernhard was a card-carrying Nazi of the Netherlands, and and it said to ask the kids, is 7 billion people too much? And went that this whole social, it's because this is all a fraud. The only way you can get people into it is by using basically brainwashing methods,
yeah,
where you try to induce in them an idea, and then for them to look around and say, oh my God, everyone believes in this. And if I say something different, it must be because I'm strange and I must be wrong,
mm,
which was the whole way the lesson plan was organized, was that there was nothing, no, in no sense were people instructed in anything. Instead, they asked me to put up signs on the different walls that said agree, disagree, strongly agree, and so forth. And it was organized like a popularity, or like a vote, an opinion poll, which of course with fifth graders, everyone's just going to go where the cool kid goes.
yeah.
And so it's just designed to manipulate children and to do this to them. Anyway, so and I thought that was also sort of what you're saying here with the fake economy and with the sort of the Starbucks experience model and so forth, is that like how much of our society and how much of our economy is based on fooling people into thinking that there's a real economy here when there's nothing.
A lot of it. I mean, my background is in marketing, so that's like how this stuff just makes total sense to me. I'm like, oh yeah, it's all bullshit. Like, so much stuff that's like sold to people is just, it really is about tapping into a certain, seeing yourself a certain way. I am a Nike, I'm a Coca-Cola, I'm the,
Yeah.
I hold these values. I mean, this is what marketing is like in, the latter half of the 20th century, and it's totally like it's just the air we breathe now. So when I first got into like making videos and talking about politics online, I felt like that was sort of like an area where I could really bring some perspective and show people, because it really is like, it's like magic. It really is like you're creating this illusion, this sensory illusion. And artists do have a lot of power, and that's why
Hmm. Hmm.
the ruling class does pay for art. Look at like Disney, right? One of
Yeah.
the biggest companies in the world that's dominating, because they know the kind of magic that lives in like storytelling is a big deal to these people. um just the aesthetics, the
The
vibes. That's what
vibe.
people call it now, is
Yeah.
vibe. It's all about
Yeah.
vibes. Yeah.
I want you to go into something else that I've seen you posting about on Twitter, if you would, um, in a moment, I guess. But because I Hitler's favorite movie, Snow White.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Hitler's favorite movie was Walt Disney's Snow White,
That's
and it
funny.
has to do with the sentimental way that things are framed. There's nothing really truthful about humanity that's expressed in that movie. It's all a way of giving you feelings, this one or that one. But I do want to get to, I mean, there's a lot that you could discuss, but I do want to just get to your conclusion here, which is that we have deindustrialized and deproletarianized our entire economy. We need to bring back industry. We need real proletarian jobs. We need to organize our government around the needs of the people, like the US Constitution intended. I am so glad for that statement. I mean, the general welfare clause is our only lifeline. I mean, it's such a fundamental conception in the US Constitution. The preamble, also the Declaration of Independence, it's right there.
Yeah.
And the fact that the government is instead being used by the Malthusian lunatics to destroy the population does not
Yeah.
mean that the U.S. Constitution is invalid. It means that it is not being followed.
It's not being used properly, right?
Mhm.
I know we should really like return to our roots as a country and like look at like what we did. We said fuck you to the British, and we said no, we're not going to be ruled by monarchy. We're going to be governed by ourselves, we the people, right? How awesome is that? There's a lot of people on Twitter who the leftist Twitter who get mad at like the idea of patriotic socialism or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Which is so silly because we should be patriots for our countries. We should be like want the best for our countries. But it almost seems like it's so funny how the ruling class sort of instills this like hatred, like destroy America, and it's like because they want to destroy America.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and they got like the woke people saying it because the things that America has done at the behest, or what the ruling class has done under the banner of America, which is it's like terrible. It's disgusting, and I went through a phase where I was like, God, I can't imagine having pride in this country, knowing all the terrible things. But then if you dig deeper and you say, well, wait a minute, there's a lot to work with in our country, and we should take it back and redefine it for what it was always intended to be.
Yeah.
What our founding fathers meant for it to be. But then you hear all these like, Soros funded things, people sharing stupid shit on Facebook saying like the founding fathers owned slaves and blah, 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 blah. And then people don't realize actually like slavery was a big debate within
Exactly. And there were
the founding fathers.
Absolutely. And we had people like Hamilton and Franklin who moved to create manumission societies. And there were, I mean, I don't have everything at my fingertips, but there was a belief among a large faction of people at the time of the creation of the U.S. Constitution that that slavery would be ended completely. And I really recommend people to read Frederick Douglass's speech given about about whether the U.S. Constitution is pro-slavery or anti-slavery. He makes a very clear argument that it's anti-slavery. And by the way, he's making that argument against people who were financed by British oligarchs who wanted to break apart the United States. Which is what the Confederacy is all about.
Well, you have to like put yourself in the shoes of the founding fathers who maybe were like, one day we want a society without slavery. How do we incept that? How do we create a foundation for that? Because people think that you can just snap your fingers and change happens, but that's not how it works. These guys had to think, way ahead of time. How can we weave into this document, these founding documents, for that to happen? And it did eventually. It did. What, like 150 years later, it did actually happen. With our greatest president, like Lincoln. Our most beloved president. From left and right, everyone loves Lincoln.
I agree with you, and I would point out, Neil Martin has been on our show a couple of times, and he's my good friend, and he has made a very clear case from Henry Carey that slavery is free trade, and free trade is slavery. The whole policy of preventing the economic development of the South, of preventing the extension of state-directed credit for infrastructure, for internal improvements, they called it at the time, that was a policy designed to ensure the continuation of free trade, which the British Empire benefited from, and in a reciprocal way to ensure the continuation of slavery, which is how you keep it's there. That was their plan for keeping the U.S. or breaking up the U.S. and then using it for their purposes. Is to say, you, like every other nation that we subjugate, are not going to be allowed to develop your manufactures. We want you to be a plantation society. You should be slave masters. And they had a bunch of people who thought the same way, who said, yeah, that's right. Human beings are just animals. We should just enslave people. Yeah, I'm an animal, but I'm the best animal. And, so they had a faction of people that they developed that were willing to do this. Andrew Jackson was a huge part of this in the shutdown of the National Bank, and therefore, you had the continuation of slavery, which never needed to happen. Hamilton wrote extensively on this. He wrote 4 major reports that were requested by Washington about how to develop an American system economy that would mean manufacturing development in harmony with agriculture and universal education and the end of slavery. So anyway, very important topic. But let's go on because I want to make sure to show people more of what you're doing. Okay, I want to show... Well, I do want to hear from you a little bit about what's going on with the DSA. We don't have to go in depth. You made these really fun tweets about how the Nazis were supporting renewable energy, which I learned a lot from that. But yeah, do you want to share any of that right now?
Well, I've only really just started to scratch the surface with that stuff because, again, a lot of this stems from studying what Peter Buffett is doing. And
Right.
through studying him, what I've learned is that he is, attached to a lot of the stuff that he invests in, and the people that he surrounds himself with are attached to the anthropological society, which stems from Theosophy. So Theosophy and then anthroposophy. It's a weird word to say, and then that's all connected to Rudolf Steiner, who was an intellectual back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he broke from the Theosophy school to create the Anthroposophy school. And that's where the Waldorf schools come from. And this is where biodynamic farming comes from. And it looks like renewable energy is another thing that's sort of tied to that. But basically it's woo-woo pseudoscience combined with like religion, and these guys do all kinds of weird sort of rituals around like planting like animal horns in the ground to like pray to Gaia so that the crops will grow better. It's it's all like pseudoscience, new age, stupid shit, But it's like people like take this stuff seriously, and so that's why Peter Buffett bought a farm here, and that's one of his bigger projects. Is he's trying to create, incubate this like alternative farming method, which, from what I've heard through the grapevine, of course, his farm is not producing very good yields because they're doing all kinds of weird, like anti-technology type farming.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that ties back perfectly to like the Nazis and how they were really into like esoteric, and they were into environmentalism. Another interesting connection is how they were really into like veganism and vegetarianism. It's almost like they really don't see humans as separate from animals. They see everything on the same level, and this Gaia worship, right? Everything goes back to like the planet worship, which it's insane. I don't know how did I start on this? Oh, you're right. And DSA, right? How does this connect to DSA? Yeah, these guys are pushing for this bill in New York State called the Build Public Renewables Act.
Yes, people should learn about this.
I hope it doesn't pass. It's not looking good for them, which is good. But they are trying to push renewables in New York State because when was that? Last year, Indian Point Nuclear finally shut down this major nuclear plant in New York, about an hour 40 minutes just north of New York City. Used to produce like a huge amount of energy for New York City. And this has been like the goal of the environmental movement, which is huge in New York State. They have their roots in New York State, you know. A goal for them has been to shut down this nuclear plant, and they've been going for like decades at this, and they finally got their wish last year, and it's been devastating, you know. The town of Buchanan, where the plant was, has suffered economically.
Mm-hmm.
The NGO that helped shut down the nuclear plant actually was trying to take half of the restitution money that they were getting from the state to help with their economic loss, which is like such a slap in the face.
Wow.
Riverkeeper. I don't know if you've heard of them, but
only from you. Yeah.
Yeah. So gas prices have gone up, you know, because of the shortage, because of the war, and everyone's electric bills are going up. But nobody wants to talk. None of these NGOs or the DSA want to talk about how that's connected. The energy companies are literally citing that as a reason why the electricity bills have gone up. Because nuclear is abundant. You know, it's like super abundant. And it's the other thing too is it's clean. We could talk about CO2 and whether or not we need more. I think you and I probably have like a less strict opinion on whether or not we need more or less CO2. But if that's your goal, is like less emissions, nuclear is less emissions. And by shutting down this plant, they have increased fossil fuel usage in New York State. So they're literally going against their own goals.
Yeah, I think that's another thing like the Obama thing. It just shows that it's not about that. You know, they don't give a damn about that stuff either. It's about...
It's insane.
Okay. Could I show... I think this is a good opportunity to show from your... Well, actually... Yeah, well, here's a couple of things we can use to frame it, and then I want to show some from your documentary. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so my friend Bridget, I think you know her, she sent me this, which I'd seen before.
I've taken a picture of that in New York City too, yeah.
Yeah, these are apparently all over Manhattan. Human overpopulation crisis, 52% of wildlife killed off in 40 years. And then here it says, free birth control, child free. So everything is very clear here.
Crazy.
And I hope that people... And I mean, you haven't really gone into it, and maybe we won't have the chance to go in depth here, but you know a lot about the role of the DSA in moving this Malthusian outlook overtly forward.
I literally helped start the local chapter. It's embarrassing. It's like they would have started no matter what, but no, I used to think like, you know, they're like Medicare for all, pushing Medicare for all. Sure. And I can't even remember what else, but
well, at the time when Bernie seemed like he might have some legitimacy, which of course he didn't.
Which he doesn't. He's anti-nuclear too. So
yeah, absolutely. But the point is that there are many races at the state level and even at the federal level that are going on in New York State right now. And I'm sure it's happening in other parts of the country as well, but there's a strong center of activity in the Hudson Valley area.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in this chapter that I helped start, which I eventually got pushed out of because I had a confrontation with the person who has now just won the primary against the 30-year incumbent, beloved incumbent, who is a super progressive guy, who is also kind of like in bed with the he was like, yes, we should shut down nuclear or Indian Point. Like he's not even, but they painted him as like, you know, a storybook villain. They literally
Yeah.
were tweeting that on that exact thing on Twitter. But so I got pushed out by, I mean, I kind of left on my own anyways, but
Yeah.
I had this confrontation with this person who just won the primary,
Hmm.
you know, a few years ago, and it was over degrowth. And I said, you know, this idea of like consumerism and overconsumption, you guys, we should be careful about this because, you know, this was, you know, an idea that the capitalists implanted as a way to sort of take the heat off of them,
Hmm.
as you know, the USSR and communism was becoming more popular around the world. So and they just like freaked out at me, and she was like real snippy at me, and she was like, actually, and she even admitted too that degrowth has some neo-Malthusian feminist strains, and I was like, oh, okay, so you're down with that. And she's totally down with, she is
Yeah.
totally
Hell
down
yeah.
with degrowth, like
Yeah.
vocal advocate of it. And she just won the primary,
Yeah.
but she didn't win the whole thing. She's probably going to win the whole thing though, because I don't think the Republicans are going to mount any kind of challenge. They don't really have much power around here, but yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, I think that people will say, "Oh, you can't talk about this kind of thing, and no one's going to respond to this." And people have said that, but the idea of focusing on the economic development of Africa, it does everything for me because, you know, the Republicans who are against the climate change hoax, they are not actually. They're also free traders. They're also
Yeah.
largely, you know, just sort of like, um, what do they call it? I forget the phrase that they particularly use to cover it up a little bit, but they're, you know, they basically represent that mode of free trade economics. Um, and meanwhile, the people who claim that they're doing Malthusianism out of, you know, respect for indigenous populations and stuff like that, I mean, their policies will prevent the economic development of Africa forever. That's this whole thing that I was reading from about how the African countries are going to get together and they're going to go to COP27 and they're going to say, "You guys aren't keeping us down anymore." So it's very
Good.
exciting, you know,
Yeah.
and it's the change that's happening in the world right now, and it needs to be made understandable to people. That's my thought. But let me continue here. Uh, you and I both identified this wonderful quote, which I'm going to have to move to here so people can read it. Okay. This is from the Club of Rome.
Yep.
The common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, this is Club of Rome. People should look up the Club of Rome if you don't know what it is. It's a, you know, organization of oligarchs in Europe in particular who got together and in the 1960s and said, well, we're going to dictate, you know, government policies all over the world.
And they
And
put out the limits to growth study, which was
exactly.
this scientific study with like these charts that said, oh, we're going to collapse and peak oil is going to happen.
This model proves
Yeah.
that we're going to have to kill everybody.
It's just what the science says, guys.
Sorry.
Sorry.
In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and in their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which demands the solidarity of all peoples. But in designating them as the enemy, we fall into the trap about which we have already warned, namely, mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. So,
Terrible.
totally psychotic, satanic view. But now let's show. Now that we've sort of introduced some of the key ideas, let's show. I got about a 2-minute section of your video to show. This is from the Space Commune YouTube. People should go and subscribe to Fox's YouTube channel here and watch this in full. It's about an hour and a half. There's a lot in it. You have tremendous footage of what's his name? Holdren? Is it Holdren? No. It's Ehrlich. You have tremendous footage of
yeah.
Ehrlich that I've never seen before. He is a wild psychopath.
He's a creep, huh?
Totally insane.
He's like a real chauvinist too. I had looked at so much footage where he was just talking about like women and like wanting to like bang women and stuff. Like he's a creep. He's
So
like a sex pest.
he's not part of the neo-Malthusian feminist tendency, I suppose.
Yeah, he'll probably call himself a feminist though. That's what they all
Sure.
do.
Well, he's for birth control, so
Yeah,
for everyone.
exactly.
Okay, so and this guy is a real sicko. What's his name again?
Jason Hickel,
Jason Hickel, right?
which is very
banned you
close
on
to
Twitter.
Jackson Hinkle, but
Yeah. People get confused, but
Yeah.
he's clearly not the same. Especially when you heard what Jackson said at the beginning of the show. So
yeah, that was awesome.
So here we go. Let's listen to a couple minutes of this and give people an idea. Was that coming through?
No, it was sounding kind of muffled.
Yeah, I got a little bit of a problem with how I'm doing this. Okay, I'm gonna do that. Hold on.
Might have to change like the audio input or
Yeah, one more try. Let's see. This one. Okay. I think I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do mute my microphone because I can't get it to come out properly from into my headset. So, all right, but let's try this. Pardon me, one moment.
Like that, in fact, that we argue could deliver even higher levels of human well-being than people presently enjoy.
So degrowth is any number of things or combination of things, but it's also very robust and good. Why is this starting to sound like it's just a blanket term that's trying to be everything to everyone? Where did degrowth even come from in the first place?
The program was originally devised by a scientist working from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Jay Forrester. It was developed under the auspices of the Club of Rome by an MIT research team to present a complex model of the world and what we humans are doing to it.
The most important lesson is that we're near the end of our development of society, which has been going on for about 2,000 years. That we've reached levels of prosperity which carry the seeds of disruption and necessitate a complete relook at the whole world's social, political, and other situations.
At the heart of the degrowth movement is a conversation about energy. Degrowth advocates are usually in favor of a transition to renewable energy, but say that this transition cannot happen fast enough. Their assertion is that citizen consumers must consume less. They argue that in rich nations like the United States, we can afford to get by on less.
The idea that you can have green growth, but you can decouple that from the consumption of energy and therefore from CO2 emission is very problematic.
The point is clear, and that is that, if we continue growing the energy system while shifting over to renewables, not only does that make the task of making the transition much more difficult, but also is going to involve, an ever-increasing amount of materials that will have to be extracted in order to produce these solar panels and wind turbines.
Of course, they realize the optics of telling poor countries to consume less is heinous. Degrowth influencers will insist that they only want degrowth in the global north, rather than the global south.
The crucial thing here is to recognize that there's a distinction between rich countries and poor nations, and poor countries when it comes to the question of degrowth. So most advocates of degrowth don't call for degrowth in the global south or in poorer nations, recognizing that in some nations, an increase in aggregate GDP even might be necessary in order to generate the resources required for investing in healthcare and education and so on. That's disputable by some people.
That's disputable by some people?
But what we do know for sure is that degrowth has to happen in rich nations. Right now, we're consuming about 100 billion tons a year, so way over the sustainable threshold. All of that, and I emphasize all of that, is due to excess consumption in high-income nations, right? If we were all to consume like the average person in the rest of the world, then there would be no ecological overshoot.
A major criticism of degrowth is Jason Hickel.
Yeah. What a lunatic.
I know.
Um,
He finally blocked me.
yeah, I saw that. No, I think that this section is totally crucial. People wouldn't know this, but the whole reason that Fox and I got to know each other was because of this documentary, and I happened to watch it, and then reached out to him basically. But I think this section is so to the point. I mean, it's incredible the way that they tried these extremely watery lies about what's going to happen to the global south and so forth. But a couple of things are clearly disproven about their approach. First of all, you know, the Western economies are falling apart right now,
Yeah.
and the effect is that people in the developing world are going hungry. So, like look
Like,
at the
I mean,
Federal
that
Reserve.
isn't just translating to them
Yeah,
getting.
right. Yeah, yeah. What a bizarre utopian belief. But
Yeah.
like the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates in response to the inflation, so called, or that's what they claim, and the effect is that the debt of course, and by the way, the express claim of the Federal Reserve is that we're going to do this to slow down the overheated economy. So they are intentionally going through the kind of thing that Paul Volcker called, when he did it in the 1970s, controlled disintegration of the economy.
Mm.
Or at least that was the phrase that was thrown around at the time. So they're saying we have to shut things down, and in the meanwhile, the fact is that there are in the neighborhood, I think, of a dozen countries that are on the verge of total default of their debt, and the World Bank is saying it's going to be many times over that very, very soon. And when you raise the interest rate, people's debt gets more expensive. So that whole thing is screwed up. The food inflation is off the charts. People are getting destroyed by it, and that has a lot to do with what's going on in the West. And then, so that's already demonstrated to be absurd, incorrect, insane. But then put it in the context of what I started with at the beginning of the show, which is the idea that there is a new movement in the world for international law and for global development, like the Chinese policy from Xi Jinping, the Global Development Initiative, which I believe was announced just under a year ago at the United Nations meeting at the General Assembly here in New York area. And look at the fact that the African nations are saying, we're going to develop and you're not going to stop us. Or the fact that, 160 nations came out, I think, and condemned Pelosi for going to Taiwan. Well over 100 nations. I'm getting things a little bit mixed up, but there's some group of nations that condemned her, and there's another group of nations that came out and said, we reassert the one China policy. You look at the pictures of Lavrov at the ASEAN summit, and he's surrounded by all the foreign ministers in Asia, and there's no isolation going on. That the Indians are saying, you can't tell us what to do. We're not going to sanction Russia if we don't think we have to. We're not going to choose a side. Just you get to boss us around. We're a civilization that is many thousands of years old, and we have the right to have our own side. So there's a whole break happening because nations recognize the collapse of the neoliberal system.
Yeah.
And that's the standpoint. That's the situation in which we could actually have a chorus of nations saying, development, 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 and nothing can stand in the way. Or for example, sustainable development means sustained development. It means you have to continue and advance. And if, like China says, China might agree with the problems that Alexander King listed in that quote that we looked at. But then their approach is they don't agree with the idea that the enemy of man is humanity.
Right.
And so the very fact that they don't allows them to solve problems.
Yeah,
and
exactly. They're like, oh, we need to actually just solve the problem. So,
yeah.
We don't need to just cover our heads and say, oh, I can't handle this. We need to just all die off, And what you're talking about, I mean, there's so many people in the United States. It's so sad. I look on Facebook and all my friends and family are like so depressed. And I get it. Like we live in a crumbling empire right now. But if you look at like the world, like what's happening in the world, the shift that's happening, it can really inspire you because it's like the rest of the world is changing and saying, no, we're going to leave you guys behind. We don't need this anymore. And so what our job, I think the most important job for us in the United States is to return to the Constitution and what our country was originally founded on, because that's the only way. We need to refound our country because our country has been taken over by, you know, the global empire global oligarchs, and we need to like if we don't want to just like go down with the ship, we need
Yeah.
to do something, but I think it'll take time because I think a lot of people too are exposed to these false, they're given false hope by whether it's Bernie or Trump or Alex Jones. They encounter these influencers who are ready to seize on that sentiment. So it's tricky to navigate that right now between like people who are like, I don't care, or whatever, and people who are just hooked into like these solutions that are just rerouting them back to being stooges for being useful for the, what this empire that's crumbling above us, the ceiling that's coming down on us right now.
I agree with you. I think, I think that the job is definitely to inspire people and give them some sense of a vision of what the country can look like, of what the world could look like, and in the meanwhile, the delusions are crumbling.
Yeah.
One point of hope is the farmer protests, because those are happening in the Netherlands, they're happening in Germany, they're happening in in India, of course, and many other locations. But in other words, they're happening in the West. And if there were some greater conception about, you got to get a crack through. This is what the whole barista thing was about. You got to crack through people's idea about what does it mean to take power. And what we're saying is that what it means to take power is to radically increase the productive capabilities of the nation in order to solve the problems of the world and the problems that we have. And, the farmers are really open to that approach.
Yes, people who are part of the production process.
Yeah.
For necessary social reproduction, for society to sustain, reproduce, and expand. That kind of work is what's necessary. And, it's not a personal offense to anybody who works at Starbucks. But
of course not.
That nobody needs to fucking work at Starbucks. Like it's not. The world is not going to end without a fucking barista. And people know this deep down. They fucking know it. But they it's seizing on these ideas, sort of an antiquated like socialism of the 20th century, where it's like just unionize. That was back when like we actually had productive labor, right? We're not
right.
You can't unionize like just service economy shit. It doesn't like help. It doesn't help it doesn't help build the world that we need,
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's just an expression of a certain, like, frankly, repulsive slavishness. All right. Because the idea that people are like, let's just go along with crumbs.
Yeah.
We want more crumbs.
Yeah.
We want more crumbs.
It is.
It's insane. They're not, and it has to do with the tendency of people not to think of the whole. The one mankind, the one nation, the one, advancement of the common welfare. That's the welfare of the people, and it's not something that you can split up and say, well, look, things are going to get really bad, but those of us who who work as baristas, they're not going to get as bad for us. Come on, you're crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's really what the nonprofit industrial complex is it's
Right.
people who are buying into this idea that the world is fucked and there's nothing we can do. And on the way out, I'm going to like just sort of be your concierge service as the plane goes down, and it's like, what the fuck are you got? How can, and then people convince themselves are like, no, I'm doing my part.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
no, you're not.
Uh,
Get a real job.
Have you ever had someone say to you, "Don't give me anything for my birthday. I just want you to pay for a goat in Kenya."
Yeah,
Right?
like the heifer stuff.
Yeah,
I
that is the greatest example to me of liberal Satanism. Because
Yeah.
it's just like that's how the world is. The world is that if you live in Africa, you're poor, but I don't. So
Yeah.
I'm doing pretty good.
I know. Well, it's
And
all
like,
about signaling. That's
yeah,
why we
right.
live in this like fucked up like royal. Everything's royalty. Oh, I need to signal to the rest of the world how prim and proper I am. We're all gonna start talking in British accents again.
Hey. we better make sure that doesn't happen.
I know,
mean,
right?
yeah, because that's what the tabloids are all about.
Fuck that! I'm from New York. I'm never gonna.
Okay, well, it's been really good talking, and I think there's a lot more to discuss. I can think of some things we got to collaborate on into the future, for sure. Including, I mean, I really do think that there's room right now to begin to dig into what we're talking about with the Constitution in a way that's going to be productive, creative, and get people to introduce ideas that are really crucial. Like, I mean, well, I'll leave it at that. We'll talk more about it another time. But I'm really grateful for the chance to talk, Fox. And
me too. It's been a lot of fun.
It has been.
Thank you for having me.
So people should follow Fox on Twitter. Actually, I can quickly make that. I can make it turn up so that people can see you. It's Fox G Green on Twitter.
Yep.
And the website is spacecommune.com, right?
Yep.
Okay, so there we go. There it is. So
awesome.
So people should be in touch with Fox, and then otherwise look forward to next week's World Land Bridge show. So thank you. Good night.
Cat's saying goodbye.
Good night, Cat.